I know that there are a number of people who have come to the Buddhist Society for the first time this evening, and I welcome you on behalf of the whole community. I would like to express some reservation on my next subject for those who are completely new to the Buddhist community, because I'm going to talk about one of the great taboos. I have been asked to speak on this subject today, and it is a very pertinent and very relevant subject, because it is about the process of dying. And it is very pertinent to myself because just the other day I was informed that one of our members of the lay community was very sick and had a stroke in hospital. I visited her many times, and when I went in I was able to speak to her, because this lady has been a very devout Buddhist and had come and stayed in our monastery, had practiced meditation, and was used to the concepts of developing the mind, and also the very clear Buddhist concept of cultivating the mind and making it very calm and tranquil before death. And so I gave her instructions, even though she wasn't conscious. It was obvious that just my words of advice and the chanting, the Buddhist chanting that I did, was very soothing and calming. You could see that on the breath, and the functions of the body calmed down. She became less agitated and more still. And then the last day, I was able to go and visit her in the morning, and I again told her to establish mindfulness, to make the mind peaceful, to let go, and to give up attachments, and to let go of the body. And then also was able to do some chanting. And at the end, her family had gathered around, and I also gave them some advice to give their mother permission to pass away and to let go, to allow her to go on to a new life peacefully and calmly without a lot of grief. And after speaking to them, I turned to the lady who was obviously dying and said, now the Ajahn will go back to the monastery. And when I said those words, she took a last breath, almost as if she was leaving as well. And just watching that process, the process of, it was one exhalation and no inhalation, made me very aware of how subtle life is. It is just that much. Either one inhalation and no exhalation, or one exhalation and no inhalation. When the breath element stops going in and out of the body, then the other functions of the body start to break up, and then the mind leaves. The mind breaks up as well. So I wanted to cover this area and discuss it from a Buddhist point of view, because it is extremely crucial for all of us. It's very relevant, and without a willingness to explore, to inquire, to give intellectual understanding, but also to a willingness to open the possibility, open up to the potential, open up to the idea. If we remain resistant, if we say, well, I don't want to talk about this subject, I don't even want to contemplate it, it won't happen to me, then we're in a state of denial, and that doesn't lead to knowledge, it doesn't lead to wisdom, it doesn't lead to understanding. it's not really suitable for a person who really is seeking inquiry into the unknown. What happens? What goes on? And that's what going to do this evening, is discuss what actually happens here, what goes on, what can we know about this state and this process of what we call life and what we call the process of the ending of that life, and how they interrelated and how do they work. Because you find that if you understand one, then you'll understand the other. The reason sometimes we can't understand our own life is because we haven't looked at the potential for that life to change. And that's why I've been telling a story quite frequently at our monastery when people come to me with problems. And many of you have heard this story many times before, but I'll tell it because I think it is a very useful one. And it's the story of the emperor. And the emperor who had three very grave questions that were on his mind. And the first of those questions was, well, who's the most important person in the world? And of course his ministers trying to ingratiate themselves with the emperor would say, of course you are. You're the most important person in the world. But he felt dissatisfied with that. And often in life we're telling ourselves the same thing, aren't we? That we're the most important person in the world, the most significant event to happen in this universe. But underlying that answer, we feel dissatisfied. It's not the real answer to that question. And the other kind of fundamental question that the emperor had was, what's the most important time in a person's life? And of course the ministers would say, well, it was when you were born, or when you were crowned, when you came to power. And of course that wasn't really satisfying. And the other fundamental question that the emperor had was, what's the most important thing to do in one's life? And some ministers would say, oh, the most important thing to do is go over and conquer that kingdom over there. Get more power, get more wealth, get more status, more prestige. Become a world-conquering monarch. And underlying that, there was a sense of, that's not really where it's at. That's not really true. And so whenever someone come to the kingdom, the emperor would ask them these three questions. Who's the most important person? What's the most important time? And what's the most important thing to do in life? Until one day he heard that there was a sage who lived on a mountain. And so the emperor decided, well, I'll go and seek out this wise man. So he took his retinue off with all his soldiers, got to the base of the mountain, and then had a change of heart. He thought, well, it's not really skillful to go and seek out these religious people with my soldiers intact, in tow, and also to be dressed as the emperor. Then he may be put off, may not answer the questions, or may give me platitudes like everyone else. So he changed his clothing into the robes of a peasant, or the clothing of a peasant, and left his regalia there, and told his soldiers to wait and guard the bottom of the mountain. He was going to head up to see the sage by himself. And being an emperor who hasn't walked up a mountain very often, it took him a long time. By the time he got to the top of the mountain, it was starting to get late. It was getting dark. And so, being in a hurry, being a very busy man, he rushed into the cave, coughed a few times, trying to locate the sage. And he saw the sage sitting on a rock, very still, sitting meditation. So he coughed louder. Very important, busy person. And the sage sat very still. So he coughed louder. There was no response. And so the emperor, being impatient, turned to leave, but noticed that outside it got pitch black and the wild animals would be coming out. And so he became frightened and timid. He knew he couldn't leave, so he'd have to spend the night in the cave. So he stayed there for the night, and the sage sat meditation all night. And so the emperor was forced to sit there all night, waiting for dawn. Then finally, when dawn arrived, the emperor went out of the cave and went over to the edge of a great cliff and was looking over his kingdom. And looking out over his kingdom, he felt a sense of relief. For the first time in his life, he'd put down the burden. He'd put down responsibilities. And he was watching this beautiful sunrise. And then suddenly he heard this cough behind him. And he turned around as he was tottering on the edge of this cliff. And there was the sage standing there with a big sword pulled, drawn, as if to chop off his head. And not being able to step back because there was certain death. Not being able to escape forward because there appeared to be certain death. The sage asked the emperor, "Who's the most important person? What's the most important time? And what's the most important thing to do?" And being faced by death for the first time, the emperor's mind stopped, became focused, and he understood. And so he bowed down to the feet of the sage, and the sage put the sword down and said, "Now you understand. The most important person is the person you're with, be it yourself or be it others. They're the most important people. The most important time is the right here and right now. And the most important thing to do is to be totally aware of the here and now." And the emperor, understanding, was able to go down and lead his kingdom with skill, with compassion, and with wisdom. And if we understand that too, those three simple answers to those three profound questions, we too would be able to deal with our kingdoms, our realms, our family lives, our duties, our worlds with more skill. Because when we stop and face the reality that we can't go forward, we can't step back, and we can't be still, then we become very aware of the present moment. We become aware of what's important. And that's what the contemplation of impermanence, the contemplation of cessation of things, the contemplation of death does, doesn't it? It makes things stop. It makes the mind sober. It makes the mind clear. It makes things be placed, or puts things into perspective and places them in perspective. What's important? And that's why one of the meditation subjects the Buddha instructed people, he once asked his attendant, the Venerable Ananda, he said, "Ananda, how many times a day do you contemplate your own death?" And Ananda, his attendant, said, "At least 7 times a day." And the Buddha said, "That's not enough. You should contemplate your death every in-breath and out-breath.